Hello and welcome to my first live stream. This is Hannah Wallen. I'm here with Mr. Dragonbeard, who has been through an ordeal with the Canadian family court system. Now, he cannot talk directly about his ordeal, but he can. And of course, I'm having my first technical difficulty.
Oh, is it getting? Oh,
I have an echo. Can you hear the echo?
yeah. I'm thinking, would I have anything to do that? No, I don't think I don't think I have anything up.
Okay, I found it. Well, I thought I found it. Where the hell else is it open?
I'm just closing anything I don't need open just to make sure.
All right. Now I can't hear it.
Okay.
No, I can still hear it. This is insane. I'm just going to go through and like mute everything that's...
It's really weird. Yeah, it's playing that delay. Yeah, good. Here we go.
There we go. Well, no, it had opened another window sometime when I wasn't looking. I think I must have clicked on something twice. All right.
It snuck it.
Yes. Now that like the 8 people who are watching, who it says are watching, who apparently can't chat because Google doesn't like my audience. Like I actually set it up to chat too.
Yeah.
The 8 people who are watching, 6 people who are watching, get to see how a honey badger starts her first Google Hangout. And here I started early to avoid technical difficulties, and then I had them anyway. So, Mr. Dragonbeard has been through an ordeal with the Canadian family court system. And there are 2 previous videos. He spoke to Dean Esme and Paul Elam about what he was going through at the time that he was going through it. But due to the fact that Canadian courts can use kind of gag orders to silence the fathers that they abuse, we can't necessarily discuss the case directly anymore. So for this reason, we're going to discuss instead the system, sort of what's going on. And I'm going to hand it over to you, Mr. Dragonbeard, and ask you to describe the process a little bit and some of the problems that you learned about during your specific ordeal.
Okay. Well, in a nutshell, for anyone who wants to kind of get a glimpse and hasn't been through the Ontario family court system, first there'll be some type of a split, whether it's amicable or not. And when the government gets involved, the first thing that they're going to have is a priority to get the man out of the house, then to start giving information to any kind of information she needs, any support she needs to the woman, not the man. I was asked repeatedly, what's your income? What's your income? We can't help you. We can't help you. And that's just information, you know. And then they'll start immediately trying to put procedures in place to, you know, give official custody to her of the children and support payments, getting them arranged right away. There's very few exceptions to what I've just described. And it's very disorienting because, you know, like I was very upfront about what was going on for myself. I remember when the papers came that were being served on me, the guy was trying to be sneaky about it. He was like, oh, I'm here about, I forget what, some kind of service or something. And I wasn't home at the time, but I knew what it was. I just told him when I'd be home from work. And I received the, you know, I received the paperwork. And that's where you go immediately. Let's talk. It's the conversation immediately in Ontario is let's talk about how she's going to get custody and how much money you make, so how much we can give to her. And from then on in, if you're going to fight that or in any way try and challenge for rights with your kids, you're going to have to get either a lawyer or you're going to have to be really good at researching stuff on your own and networking with people to figure out what's going on.
And oop, I seem to have lost sound there for a second. Can you tell me some of the hurdles that you came up against in that process where you trying to find out what you were supposed to do and so on. Some of the things that made it difficult in your case, or some of the
Yeah,
things that you
well,
discovered
so
that can make it difficult.
yeah, okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to avoid talking about anything specific about my ex, because even though I have in the past in general ways, it's never really been about her anyways. So let me just say I had concerns going in about the fact that my child was where she was. I guess that's very general, but essentially, I thought the court would have in place a system, and I was totally expecting that they would be impartial about this. That once we got to court and started this process, they'd say, "What are your concerns on both sides?" And I was like, my concerns are about my child's safety. I think we should all be going through evaluation, whether that's a psychologist, psychiatrist, or someone with, proper the proper ability to see behavioral issues and environmental issues. And they had nothing like that in place. And because of that, this entire process dragged out for 3 years. The court did ask a third-party investigator to come in from the Office of the Children's Lawyer, and she's a social worker. She did an investigation for several months, 30-page report, which really looked one-sided, we'll just say. This was ignored for 2 years in the system. This is really what really devastated me. And along with that, I don't mean to downplay this, the fact that I was being financially skewered to the point where I had to move in with my parents, and I was wearing sometimes like torn clothes and stuff as a professional truck driver to work. I didn't have any money, and they were always saying I was behind in money. At some point, about a year ago, I just accepted the fact that if they're going to put me in jail, they're going to put me in jail, and I just kind of live with that, because I did get that threat. We're gonna destroy your credit, we're gonna take your license, we're gonna take your passport, and we could put you in jail. So I was just like, well, if you're gonna do that and there's nothing I can do about it, I guess I should just accept this.
And have you found, with the evaluation of child support, have you found that the statement, a lot of feminists will say, well, it's income based. It's always fair because it's income based. Have you found that that's not the case?
So a total lie. Okay, so that's the way that I'm sure naive people intended it to be taken within the bureaucracy, whoever set it up at the political level. But they have a workaround that they use on a regular basis, which is if your income is at a certain level, first of all, they've been moving it up over the years. So it's already very high. And the last concern, if it's a concern at all, is your quality of life as a father or as just a person. But the workaround that they use with me, and they've used it with many, many guys, is that if your income drops, even if it's for very understandable or reasons that couldn't be avoided, they just go, well, we think that they need this level of income here based on your old income, so we'll move it down a little bit, but not all the way. So now what you have is even more indiscrepancy, where there's no way, in my situation, there's no way I could pay what they were demanding. So they're financially destroying you. They're morally destroying you. They're unwilling or unable to help your child. It's a completely biased system. Like at every stage, I was naively expecting some kind of different level of impartiality to occur, and I was just stunned. But let me just say, I think this is important. There are a lot of rational or good people in the system, but the system itself carries them right down the river. Like that social worker, I think, was very clear and very professional in her report. And like I say, it was ignored for 2 years.
Now, is that ignored because it didn't go along with the narrative that the court was trying to uphold?
Let's put it this way. Yeah, well, if it had said the things it said about my ex, it said about me, I'm convinced that they would have cracked down immediately. Well, let me give you an example of double standards. I have a friend that will go unnamed just for privacy issues, but I have a friend, this person I know. There was just an innocent misunderstanding at the school. One teacher made one little statement about him that was concerned about something his child had said. And within a couple hours, the police, hands-on weapon, were at his door with a social worker to take his children into another room and talk to them. Right?
Wow.
And yeah, right. And let me just say that the stuff that was in this report much more, much more detail on an ongoing basis, completely ignored. Like, and before anyone thinks that, this is, if you have a situation where it's just a father making claims, I expected they would not take my word for it. I'm a skeptic by nature. I think people should have evidence. What I expected is that they would listen to what their investigator said. This is multiple sources. There was an investigation done. And okay, so now this has been done. What are you going to do about it? Nothing.
And so even with professional documentation, there's no guarantee that if the professional documentation comes from the father, that the court's going to take it into consideration.
Right.
And so it sounds like essentially the Canadian court system is so predisposed to a one-sided finding in parental custody cases that they will ignore evidence if it comes from the side that is not the side they're predisposed to favor.
Yeah. Well, I don't know how much of it is just that old-fashioned kind of bias that we like to protect women and think the best of women, especially mothers. I think there's also a bureaucracy now involved that is continually being poisoned by political partisanship, by ideologues that have been, tapping at it for like 40, 50 years, to the point where now there are certain assumptions, and it's just in the system. These assumptions are now built right into the system. So if a judge, for instance, wants somebody to, mother or father, wants to get them a psychological evaluation, they don't have the power to do it. That's things like that in a system are a serious failure to children.
Yeah, now, see, there's a difference there between the Canadian system and the U.S. system. In the U.S. system, a judge can order a medical evaluation. I know that because I've seen that done. But there is one thing that is shared between the Canadian system and the U.S. system, and that's being led by English common law. And to my understanding, the predisposition we've been discussing comes from an actual bit of activism by a feminist named Carolyn Norton back in the mid-19th century, actually kind of the early 19th century, close to the mid-19th century, where she helped to pen a bill that would become the Custody of Infants Act in 1839, and she sent a plea to the Lord Chancellor that's referred to now as the plain letter to the Lord Chancellor. That the text of that plea is essentially the wording of the tender years doctrine. And the tender years doctrine was in place for several decades and was eventually replaced by something called the best interest of the child's best interests of the child doctrine.
Their new mantra to defend anything they do.
But what I've read a couple times online, and I thought I was going to be able to find this before the show, and I couldn't. But in that legislation, in that bit of law, in the comment section for the legislators, where they sort of give guidance as to how this law is supposed to be interpreted, it is stated that it is still considered the tender years doctrine is a guide for understanding the best interest of the child. So it's still considered to be in the best interest of the child by the court system that the child be during the younger years placed with the mother. So they're still using the tender years doctrine. They're just calling it the best interest of the child doctrine, which I think is pretty tricky. And that may be part of what you were witnessing. But did it seem as though there was sort of an overall belief in that, or like I know you mentioned at least one individual that seemed unbiased in the court system, but as far as the system itself is concerned, besides the judge, did you encounter any other biases, that you would be able to talk about in the system?
Let's see. Biases. Well, actually, I was pleasantly surprised. I had a couple. I won't go into the details, but the night of our separation, there was 2 female officers that came to the house that night. There was no murder or anything, just so you know. But they were there and they were talking to us, and I was actually very surprised that they were very professional and unbiased. They were really helpful, and in fact, I should have listened to more of their advice. But I know that that's one thing I didn't experience, but I know there is often that level with a lot of police officers, that they're told things that give them that bias to their view of what to expect.
Sort of primary aggressor training where they're taught to presume the man guilty and in any kind of a conflict.
Yep.
Yeah.
Let's see. My own lawyer and I, though, and let me just say this, he did an excellent job stating my case and doing what I wouldn't have been able to do for myself. But he and I, behind closed doors in his office more than once, disagreed about the system, where he still had a lot of these really old-fashioned notions about the system being fair. And I think that has a lot to do with when people are involved in a system like this as the main course of their life. It's hard for them to see after that much of investment and involvement that what they've been involved in has really been destructive in a way.
It's very difficult to, when you dedicate yourself to something and you find out that it's become corrupt, it's very difficult to parse that and accept that you've been part of the corruption. So I guess I can understand that. Now, do you think that you would have had even a chance to get the ruling that you got out of your case? That, like, I know we can't talk about, what was decided and everything, but do you think the decision would have been much worse if you hadn't had representation?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. There's so much inside talk and there are certain things you're not supposed to bring up or you'll just get the judge mad. And I even some of the things on the stand that I said, I think angered the judge, and has nothing to do with reality. It has to do with the fact that I'm just supposed to know better than to say those things, even though they're relevant. And how to explain that? So I guess the best way that I can describe that is my judge being very experienced and having been a judge once himself for quite a while. He was able to argue my case by focusing in on a few specific things and it was a long process for him where he allowed essentially our case to start out with, well, we just want to see, this kind of even-handed approach. We just want some custody sharing, we just want some back and forth. And only as there was no cooperation over the 3-year period did he eventually get finally at the end where he said, listen, I think that what Your Honor needs to do is, and it was much more to the point of arguing custody itself. It's like 3 years of building to that point. I can tell you that the judge stated outright at one point in the court case that he did not feel that the court had the right to take custody away from the mother. Like, period.
So there wouldn't have been a circumstance under which he would have considered that, huh?
I think attempted murder would probably be a circumstance, but I have to say, your listeners might think I'm joking about this or making it up. I'm not. I know someone who lives here in my hometown that many years ago, when his child was quite young, the custody was with his ex. They were separated already. And she eventually turned herself in with her boyfriend voluntarily as crack addicts to get therapy, so that they could get out of their addiction to crack cocaine. The Children's Services did not notify him of the correct time. My friend happened to show up early to the court proceeding, and he heard Children's Services say, when the judge asked, is the father involved? Is there any family member that I should know about before we put this child basically into the system temporarily? And the Children's Services said no. And they had spoken to him. My friend has no criminal record. So he stood up and he said, Your Honor, I'm right here. Who are you? I'm the father. And the judge chewed out Children's Services, obviously, for doing that in his courtroom. But as soon as she got out, there was no procedure involved. She immediately was given custody back.
So they didn't care about the benefit to the child from having the stable environment from the father. They were going to just put the child into the system and then give the child back to the mother after the rehab.
Right. Well, the idea of best interests of the child, just like anything in life, that is a noble goal, but it can very quickly become an excuse for whatever you're trying to do, right? So, for instance, we'll use an army analogy. An army might have a motto, we only protect the weak, right? But in saying we only protect the weak, they may start using that to justify things that are aggressive and uncalled for. I found the same thing throughout the system thoroughly that when they say best interest of the child, that is loaded with that child should be with the mother, the father needs to pay money, and everything revolves around that. That is the best interest of the child.
Well, yeah, and all they have to do anytime they want to add something into that is just redefine the best interest of the child to include it.
Right.
And just historically, it doesn't take a lot of justification to do that. And I've noted here in the United States, it's become easier and easier for the state to remove a child from a family's home. And it seems like the only time that the Child Protective Services here fails to do that when they set their mind to it is the few times when they actually really need to. But most of the time, if they decide that they want to get a child out of a home, all they have to do is word things correctly. They don't actually have to have solid evidence. All they have to do is word things correctly and go through the process. And it's a matter of navigation. It has very little to do with whether or not the child actually needs to be removed from the home. And I know I've noted the same thing with custody arrangements. It seems to be largely geared towards how you word things and the court procedures being correctly, like you push the right buttons, dot the right I's, cross the right T's, and you get your better results and so on. Although there's still a pre-programmed, believe the woman, place the child with the mother, make the father pay money. It seems to be that way in both the US and Canada.
I've heard good things about shared custody. I think that we should move towards anything that has more to do with impartiality. It should not be primarily about picking your favorites based on adult politics. If they say best interest of the child, best interest of the child is to take a step back and try to make a decision based impartially here, not with everything kind of preloaded, and you have to kind of work and try and grind through to get to that equal place. It's difficult to convey how hard it is, how hard it's been for the last 3 years, increasingly just trying to keep my mental state positive. I've been working the entire time, which, if I was someone who is, I don't know, I guess if I would be angry if I was really wealthy and they had taken like a big chunk of my wealth. But essentially, I was wealthy enough where it didn't really destroy my quality of life. But for most of us, that's just not the situation. When I say I had to move in with my parents, I mean I would have been homeless. I don't mean I needed a new car and I was saving money. I mean I would have been homeless. And there's no men's shelters, no men's facilities here. There's one that's just basically starting up for information in Toronto that seems to be doing good work. But the services need to change, and I think that, like I say, what I've heard about the idea of shared custody sounds like a no-brainer. Why do we start with the assumption of who gets custody? Most likely the mom. We should start out with, let's do shared custody. Is there a problem with that? If there's a problem, we'll hear it out.
Yeah, there's been some research that backs that up. Cynthia Harper of the University of Pennsylvania and Sara McLanahan of Princeton found that boys are significantly more likely to end up in jail or prison by the time they turn 30 if they're raised by a single mother. Bruce Ellis of the University of Arizona found that a third of girls whose fathers left home before they turned 6 ended up pregnant as teenagers, compared with just 5% of girls whose fathers were there throughout their childhood. A study by Mary, let's see if I can pronounce her name right, Corcoran and Roger Gordon of the University of Michigan shows that receipt of welfare income has negative effects on the long-term employment and earnings capacity of young boys. And their study also found that both boys and girls are twice as likely to become unwed teen parents if raised without their father. So it's pretty clear, just on the research on fatherlessness, that removing one parent from a child's life, and we know for sure on the part of the father, we just would assume the same would be true if they completely removed the mother. But removing one parent from a child's life, removing the influence and the nurturing of one parent from a child's life, clearly does affect the outcome of a child's growing up. That they do make mistakes that they would not have made had they had the guidance of both parents.
Yeah, absolutely. And whenever you point this out, the traditional now response is you're attacking single parents. No, we're not attacking single parents. That's a reality it's going to happen. That's not the point. The point is we shouldn't be gearing ourselves towards that as if it doesn't make a difference when it doesn't have to be that way.
We definitely should be gearing ourselves towards encouraging teamwork and,
Right.
setting things up so that the parents can work together. And this is something that, fathers' rights groups have worked on. Fathers' rights groups have fought for joint custody, for 50-50 shared parenting in uncontested divorce cases where there isn't somebody going, no, I want full custody. And feminists have fought that by claiming that it was an every case imperative, and they fought it by demonizing fathers as deadbeats and abusers, where here we see evidence that without the father's nurturing, you have bad outcomes for the kids. We also have evidence in the United States, at least, that abuse is not a gendered trait. That, with mothers having the majority of custody, they're also the majority of abusers. And if abuse was a gendered trait, they wouldn't be. There wouldn't be an increase of abuse among women just because they've got more custody. And feminists will argue that if fathers had more custody, then there'd be more abusive fathers. But the fact of the matter is, they're still arguing opportunity there. It just basically proves again that this isn't something that just men do. This is something that is a dysfunction among parents.
One of the things that actually angers me, and I have to always make sure to take a second before I respond to it, is, and I have heard this again, even from my own lawyer, right? Who, like I say, defended me, my case. He argued it really well. So this is not a complaint about him, but I'm just saying, when I hear this, it really angers me that the response is, why is it that only 7% of the time men get custody in Canada? And over 80% of the time women do. Like, there's no scenario where feminists would be okay with this, right? This should be just an alarming statistic. It should be in the paper on an ongoing basis. Why is it this stacked? Why is it this tilted? But the answer that I'm given whenever I bring this up is, well, men just don't try for custody as much. Well, let's play this one out. So I'm going to essentially destroy your reputation. I'm going to drain you of your financial independence, possibly make you homeless, possibly throw you into prison, right? Give you a criminal record. And you're still not going to probably get to see your kid or make any major difference in their life while you're trying to do all of this. So why don't you just do all of that and go through the system and risk all of that? Well, most fathers don't. They basically duck and move, right? Because they're like, I'm not going to get my kid. I'm going to end up with all of these very serious life-destroying issues. Of course, you're sending the clear message: men, don't try for custody. You are not wanted in this courtroom.
Now,
and then they pretend they're innocent about not knowing what's going on.
Would you say your financial situation hampered your ability to afford legal counsel? Now, I know you had to do a fundraiser for the child support.
It's still going to be years for me paying it off. I think a total cost will be somewhere around $40,000, maybe more. That's just for for me to have the right to argue and say that I should have a role in my child's life, essentially, as opposed to in every other. Well, what I was granted initially was a few hours on Friday every other week. No, every week, a few hours on Friday. It's like, that's more like an uncle. That's not a father, That's not impartial. That's not trying to find an agreement or an arrangement that's good for the child. My daughter, I don't think this is revealing personal information, as most people would imagine. My daughter loves me and I love her. I'm not a dangerous person. There's no need for any of this. I'm just appalled that this is the gauntlet that fathers are being shoved through, and kids are being shoved through along with them.
Yeah, and that's a very good explanation for why many fathers are unable, not unwilling, but unable to actually go for custody. If you cannot pay a lawyer, and there are a lot of lawyers that simply will not take a case unless you can pay them up front. I mean, there are lawyers that'll allow you to pay them over time, but in a lot of locations, there's a lot of guys that don't have access to that. And then, of course, there's also the situation of, like, a truck driver is a pretty median income. There's guys that are working in retail, that are
Yeah.
cashiers at,
Yep.
your local grocery store or your local department store, or they're stock boys at night, things like that, or they're working in security, unarmed security, which is close to a minimum wage type position, and they're not going to be able to afford even the ability to pay a lawyer back over time, especially if they lose their case.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, no, it makes sense that a lot of guys can't go for custody.
Now, do you think it would be helpful if I just gave like very simple numbers about what kind of, because Ontario is one of the worst areas for what they demand for money.
Yeah, if you
Just so
give a
some of your,
kind of a brief rundown.
okay, so initially when this all started, I was making about $60,000 to $64,000 a year. Now, as a truck driver, a lot of that money goes back. A good substantial amount of that money goes back into my road expenses, but that's on paper what it looks like I was making. So for one child and total support, spousal and child support for one child, I was told to pay well over $1,900 a month, which that's a lot, right? And then as my income started dropping because I had to try and make different work arrangements, that remained in place. Eventually, I had to take a different job so that I could try and fight to see my daughter. And the court, 3 different judges, I think it was, said that it was a justified change in job for my daughter's sake. Dropped my income down almost to half. And after 8 months, they decided to finally make a decision on that, where I was still paying the old amount of $1,900 and something a month. And they dropped it down to almost $1,600 a month, which is very little drop, right? So this is where the point gets in when there's no way I could have paid. There was no way it could have happened. And finally, just so people know, I was lucky. This judge did decide that was insane and did something, again, very unusual, but not only lowered the amount to where it's supposed to be, which is still high, but retroactively changed it for the last 2 or 3 years. So I was very lucky. That does not always happen.
It doesn't always happen here in the United States either. And what you're describing, where they base what your obligation is on what they think you should be making, I don't know if it's referred to the same way there, but it's called here imputed income.
Yes.
And I've seen that applied in cases where it's more than doubled the income on which a man's child support obligation is based. Right. And it can land a guy in jail real fast. There's actually research on that as well, where a large number of men who are living in poverty, judges order them to get better jobs without regard to the economy, without regard to the job availability in the area they live in, and so on. And then when they can't, they go to jail.
And mind you, this entire time while they're doing that, those demands on the father, they, in my experience, almost never make those demands of the mother.
Right. Well, she's got custody and she's relying on child support. She's not expected to strive to better her financial situation or the child's financial situation by working herself.
Well, and if I can just say one more thing here, the amount that I'm paying now is what I should have been paying for that entire time. They've set it down to that, which is just under $1,000 a month for one child and spousal, which is still an extraordinary amount in my opinion. But the reason I'm stating this is the new decision, is that in the decision, the judge first, this is sentences right next to each other, first says that both parties are expected to be self-sufficient. And so the party who currently, which is not me, of course, the party that is not, is expected to become financially self-reliant. That's the law. And then the next sentence is, so these payments will continue for the next 5 years. So I will be paying twice as long as I was married to a full-grown, capable person. And that part of it, I think, is becoming extremely common.
Yeah, and that's a problem here in the United States as well, in states where alimony is still common. Now, technically, alimony can go both ways, but more often than not, it is applied unilaterally to cases where the husband earns more than the wife. And that was when, technically, when my husband got divorced, he could have gone for alimony. The situation was remedied quite soon thereafter. But yeah, at that point in time, he could have gone for alimony. And it would have been a rare instance because most of the time it's applied in the other direction. But before...
Sorry, I'm just going to say as a last thought on that, again, it doesn't have to be a gendered issue. If they would just say, these are the criteria and we're not going to extend it unreasonably. Like, for instance, we'll give you 1 year of spousal support unless there's extenuating circumstances, male or female, whichever way it's going. And then the person will know, oh, wow, I do need to become self-sufficient. Like, this is serious business. Right now, they encourage whichever party is getting money and not working. Like, what message is that? It's two messages, it's
essentially an encouragement to rely on someone else instead of being self-reliant, which is a lot like breaking somebody's legs for their own benefit. And it's bad for both parties there. Yeah,
it's an unhealthy message completely.
The amount that a woman might get from a guy at your income level, or a guy that might get from a woman at your income level, the amount they're going to get in spousal support is probably less than they would earn even at a basic job. And it's not going to come with the confidence that just knowing that you earned your own way can build. It's going to come with the knowledge that you're having to rely on somebody else for your income and your welfare.
And it does the opposite thing to the person. And I realize, like you say, sometimes it is a woman who's being hit up for the money. It does the opposite to the other person. It makes you feel like, well, what am I, the sucker? Why am I working and killing myself? And they're taking obscene amounts of money from me where I'm never going to get ahead, and nothing seems to be changing. It demoralizes the person who is being productive, who is working.
Yeah, and it kind of makes you feel like almost an indentured servant at that point.
Yeah. And again, the child and spousal, in my opinion, should be two separate things. I'm talking about spousal, not child support. In my case, I've never had an issue with paying for my child to, have, things that she needs. That's never. So I just want to clarify that.
And this is a common thing I've come across. Like, we, the men's rights movement, talk about child support and issues of unfairness related to child support and everything. And I personally think child support's kind of an outdated system simply because of the reasons it was in place. But most men I talk to who have been divorced from their wives and been ordered to pay child support are eager to do what's right for their kids. They're eager to do what's best for their kids.
Absolutely.
They want to, and they want to be there to nurture and support their kids, and that includes financially. They just don't want to be homeless in the process.
Yeah, and you just look at, and hopefully most people are hearing about this now, because I see it more and more often that it's being posted, the male suicide rate. Like, if men didn't care about their kids' well-being, then why is it that when you take their kids away, that so many of them become self-destructive, right? Let's really think about the things we're saying about men. We are not heartless creatures. We're not, we're not disposable. We are an important part of our kids' lives, and they're vitally a part of ours.
And then you get into this situation where you only get to see your kids a few times a month. It becomes a situation where you're waiting the whole rest of the month to get to see your kids.
Yeah.
Yeah. But and regarding the suicide issue, I'm aware that there's been a couple of men in Canada that have actually committed suicide in front of courthouses. One who set himself on fire. This is a situation that, when you take away the relationships that a man has invested his whole person in, and men are invested very heavily in the welfare of their families and the structure of the family that they built, and the care and nurturing of the not just the kids but their wives. You take away the wife's love, you take away the children's presence, you take away the ability to nurture and protect their children. There's a constant worry there. And
the double standard too is, if anyone even suggests, it's very difficult to do. If you suggest that a mother is mentally ill, then you are attacking her personally. But if you look at these cases, I am sure that they were right away written off as mentally ill, the guys who you're talking about who committed suicide. And to be sure, it is a type of mental illness, but there are reasons that brought it on.
And of course, it's okay to be mentally ill if you, you
If
know,
if it's a
it's
natural
okay if
problem,
it's a natural thing. But if it
yeah,
happens because you've been abused, then you're the bad guy,
yeah,
And it's not like talking about a person's mental health in a divorce case is an attack necessarily. You're having to deal with the welfare of the child. You're having to deal with the reality that the child's going to live with, and whether measures need to be put into place to make sure that the parents' needs don't supersede the child's needs. And then that's a situation, it's a rough situation to deal with, because like I've been in the mental health system myself, and I've never been incarcerated or anything like that, but I had issues with medication I had for my asthma that caused issues that were diagnosed as a mental health condition for a while.
oh wow,
And you have to realize that just because you're going through something as a person who's got a dysfunction like that, you have to realize just because you're going through something and you're suffering, and your life might be a little rougher with that than it was without it, it doesn't make the people around you less human, and it doesn't make their rights less human rights. So like it's not an attack on the person to say this individual may have problems that could lead to problems for someone in their care. It is, a reality, and a way to deal with that reality, and say, what can we do to preserve the relationship between this person and the people in their care, or the family members around them, without allowing harm to come to anybody. That's reasonable.
yeah, absolutely.
But we're gonna end up closing the hangout here soon. I figured it would probably go a little longer than the previous ones, and it's
Oh,
been
and
about 45 minutes. So I thought,
can I just quickly say before I forget, a special thank you to you, Mike Rue, Dean Esme, Paul Elam, and in fact, Dean Esme and Paul Elam's names were read out twice in court.
oh wow,
Yeah,
that's
yeah,
interesting.
because my social media stuff, some of it, a relative of hers brought some of my social media stuff in and was trying to use it to make me look bad. And for the vast majority of it, the judge just seemed to not care in the least. But when I heard their names being read out in court, I was like, I got to tell Dean, I got to tell Paul.
If nothing else, that's a bit of a victory, simply because now their names are in the court paperwork. That's set in stone.
And to everyone who gave money so that I was able to go through this and take a shot for my daughter's sake. Just thank you to everybody.
And that's a rough one, but I am glad people were able to help. And I also wanted to ask you before we go, did you have any advice if you were to run into a guy and he says, I'm a dad and I'm just starting out on this journey? Did you have any advice that you would be willing to share?
Oh, wow. Situation means a lot, but essentially, my main advice I would be trying to tell them not to be naive about expecting neutrality or impartiality, that any chance that they get to, as long as it's not immoral or a lie, if it's something real, like for instance, you talk to a police officer in your case who says that you should file a complaint or a charge, do it. This is about your child, and you don't. I know a lot of men don't want to attack their ex for one reason or another, through the police or through the court. But this is the system that's set up. It's meant to be one that sets up, what do you call that? It's adversarial. If you will not be aggressive at all, your child's going to lose, and you're definitely going to lose. So I know it goes against most people's nature in this way, but you're going to have to suck it up.
Okay. I think that's pretty good advice, especially, knowing that a lot of men really aren't geared towards, jumping to the attack when they're dealing with somebody that they used to love,
Yeah.
But yeah, definitely you're dealing with an adversarial situation, and you're dealing with an adversarial system.
Oh, and document, including, this again goes against a lot of people's inner ethics, but including looking into whether you're allowed to record conversations in your area, turning on your phone or whatever when you're having conversations, just to document the things that are going on, so that when you go in front of an authority figure, it's not just your word against the other person's word. You have some evidence that something's wrong.
Yep, that's true. Evidence, physical evidence is just about everything in court.
Yeah.
Especially for the underdog. And did you have any other pieces of advice that you wanted to offer?
The only other advice I'll give, and this is critical, try to have a support network, have family and friends that you're close to. I know for me, when things got tough, sometimes I had to force myself off of my butt, on the couch or even just laying in bed, get out and see somebody, even if it's for no particular reason. Connection to other people will keep you from slipping into a dark hole. And your kid needs you to do that.
And on that note, I'm going to offer a bit of advice to anybody who has a friend or a family member who may be going through this. Check on them every so often and see how they're doing for that very same reason. We talked about male suicide related to this. This is something that is, like you said, a deep, dark hole that when men get dropped down this hole, a lot of times they don't really have any point of reference for it, anything to compare it to. And so it's kind of hard for them. It's hard enough for them to talk about stuff to begin with, but it's especially hard for them to go to friends and family members and say, I'm going through this, because it sounds ridiculous that this type of stuff might be actually happening to people. And they're going to be afraid. They're going to be afraid. They're going to sound paranoid. They're going to be afraid. They're going to sound like they're whining about their ex. They're going to be afraid that they're going to sound like a deadbeat. So, check on them and let them know that you're open to listen to what they're going through and offer them advice if you can. And even if you can't offer them advice, at least offer them a steady shoulder to lean on, somebody that knows what they're going through and doesn't think they're crazy and doesn't think they're a deadbeat and doesn't think that they're just an exception, but understands that this is systematic. And
if whenever you get a chance, get involved in telling your local representatives you're voting for that this is a problem and that the system is hurting families. It's hurting children. It's hurting fathers. It's hurting everybody. Get involved in that, learning the best way to communicate that. Maybe there's groups in your area, or maybe you can go in and just talk to someone in the office coming up to election time.
And I will say this is something that definitely needs to change, the situation, both in the United States and Canada. I believe this also goes on in the UK, and it's all due to that tender years doctrine and the laws that came after it that are based on it. Various areas in all three countries have had efforts put forth by men's groups, fathers groups, to try to get equally shared parenting laws passed, with the idea that in cases where custody is not contested, it would be 50-50 custody. Half the time would be spent with the mother and half the time would be spent with the father. And, the child support would be geared around that. And every single time one of these efforts is made, feminist groups come out of the woodwork to oppose it. So when you hear about a bill being put forth to your representatives to enact this as law, it is as important as it can possibly be for you to contact them and let them know that you do approve it, that you do want this, and send them information, send them statistics on, the studies that I just referenced are available online. They're also listed in an article I wrote called The Feminist Crusade Against Fatherhood, which is published on breakingtheglasses.blogspot.com and also on the Honey Badger Brigade. And I'll try to put some of that information also in the low bar after this. But send them that information. Show them that taking a parent out of a child's life entirely is detrimental to the child. And it doesn't seem to make a difference, the difference that the court thinks, whether it's the mother or the father. If you take the father out of a child's life, it is still a detriment to the child.
Kids shouldn't have to choose, and it shouldn't be chosen like that for them unless there's a very good reason.
Right. So definitely contact your representatives anytime that you see this coming up. And, even contact your representatives when you don't and ask them why they're not bringing it up. Yep. And with that,
you never know. They might be an ally and they just haven't been approached about it before.
Right. Well, there's definitely some that have showed up at men's issues conferences. We've had a couple of representatives show up at various men's issues conferences. So it is very possible. And of course, There are some political groups, the right wing in the U.S., and I think the less left wing, if I understand correctly, than the other left wings in Canada and the UK are more pro-family. So
Yeah.
you may find yourself contacting somebody who's going to be sympathetic to your point of view.
Right. Yep.
And with that, I think we're going to go ahead and close the hangout. So
Okay.
thank you
Thanks,
very
Anne.
much for coming on to talk to us about your situation and about what you've learned about the system.
It was my pleasure.
Oh, I'm glad to have you. And thanks everybody for listening.